Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Alrighty, hello there everybody, how you doing? Here today wearing my new shirt because I'm in the Sharon Sunshine fan club. So there you go, don't fear the Ouija. Hey, alright, so we're here today talking part 2 here of my kind of highlights from part 2 of the state's response to Kathleen Zellner. You know, it's a lot of the. I'm going to pull out a lot of the things here that I think are really just the most, interesting of the things they had to say. Obviously there was some interesting things in the first part that I was covering yesterday, but so here we are today. We're going to be, going through some clips that I've pulled out of the kind of the final part, the second part of the state's response. So. Okay, so we're going to be moving into a bit right here where it's basically the state's arguing that what Christopher Palahniuk saw on the bullet wasn't bone and that sort of thing. So here we go. It's, to me very interesting because the argument they make is essentially that it wasn't all-inclusive. They essentially, because they weren't looking for all particles, all different types of particles, it's inconclusive that they found bone. And I'm like, what? Anyway, so it's interesting. Here we go. As the circuit court noted, Palahniuk admitted that he could not state with certainty that his observations were inclusive of all types of particles that may be on FL, and further admitted that he could not say with certainty what any of the particles on any bullet, exemplar or FL, was without future scientific testing, or without further scientific testing. Putting Palahniuk on the stand to say that he cannot state with certainty anything about the absence or presence of bone on the bullet fragment that the state never alleged went through bone anyway would not create a reasonable probability of a different result at trial. Now, I recall Palahniuk being very clear that he believed it was bone because of past times when he's seen bone embedded in the lead of bullets, and so I see no mention of that here, obviously. But what I thought is interesting is this up here. This admitted that he could not state with certainty that his observations were inclusive of all types of particles that may be on FL. So it's like, what? So because if there were lollipop particles there that were on FL, that he didn't identify the lollipop particles, that somehow the bone particles are meaningless? Is that supposed to be the logic in that? Anyway, and yeah, I say lollipop because it makes it sound more ridiculous, like it is. Alrighty, so this next segment I think is interesting because for me it's all moot. I think whether it was sweat or not sweat or whatever, the sweat is, I think, really just irrelevant here. The determination is that it was skin cells. It seems to be the consensus that it was skin cells left on the hood latch. Now, the difference is and what the state stays away from, is mentioning the quantities that were left by Stephen, the quantities that were left in the, by the 4 people out of 15 in the experiments of opening the hood of a RAV4. So it's clear that it's skin cells that are being transmitted. So arguing whether or not it's sweat or whatever is pointless, because what Dr. Reich is saying is that a swab that was a groin swab, which was taking, guess what, folks? Skin cells. Yep, you know it. That's it. Got relabeled as the hood latch swab, and that's what they're maintaining. So, and that's why the amount would be so much higher at 1.9 nanograms when they could barely get, a tenth of a nanogram or less than a tenth of a nanogram in the 4 people that were able to leave detectable DNA in the hood latch experiments. So, all right, so we're going to go into that bit right here. All right, so I thought this was interesting. Reich couldn't test for sweat, but he ruled out all the detectable bodily fluids, meaning his tests left open the possibility that Avery's DNA was deposited on the hood latch by skin cells transmitted in sweat. Neither the state okay, so that's number one. That's what they're saying, but with no, again, not focusing at all on the quantities found. but they're focusing on the fact that Avery could have, and that's all they want to focus on, not the fact that it was such an astronomical amount, an astronomically high amount. Okay, so moving from there, neither the state at trial nor the court said the sweat itself had to carry DNA, which he has now disproven, as he seems to believe. And there's that snarkiness that people are talking about. But here's the thing, King Kratz, if they weren't talking about sweat and it carrying, the DNA, why would Ken Kratz be talking about, you have to believe that officers were carrying around little vials of Stephen Avery's sweat? Why would Ken Kratz say that? But if Dr. Reich has ruled out every other bodily fluid, it's, the whole thing is that this is not a debate over whether it's skin cells. Either way, it's skin cells. Whether it came from a swab of Stephen Avery's groin, a relabeled swab of Stephen Avery's groin, or whether it's left as the people who did the experiment, when they opened the hood latch with their fingers, a tiny, tiny amount would come off of their fingers. 4 out of 15 times, a very tiny, minute amount would come off their fingers, right? So that's what they're avoiding here. That's what they're avoiding here by staying away from the amounts of DNA found and arguing only that, well, they've proven that it was possible, type of thing. And then, like I said here, that it was never mentioned that sweat itself carried DNA or whatever. That's bull. That's not true. Okay, so this next bit is going to be the state talking about, well, it's their perception of how the whole thing was going down with Zellner was, scheduling with Fallon and everybody to test the RAV4, and there was just, they were arranging more testing and stuff. And the state here basically says that, Zellner did nothing to notify the court and this and that and whatever, and so the judgment was made, and therefore, it barred everything, all that testing. So it's interesting. So anyways, here we go. I'll show you that part. The circuit court properly exercised its discretion. This part's about the further scientific testing that Zellner was trying to arrange with the state, folks. So anyway, the circuit court properly exercised its discretion when it denied Avery's motion to vacate its judgment denying his June 2017 motion. The court explained that it was denying Avery's request because Avery chose to file an incomplete motion and never asked the court not to rule on it, nor alerted the court to any negotiations about the scheduling of a hearing at the court that the court had yet to grant. It's and that's not exactly true either, because there was a letter sent over, but what they're going to say here is that it wasn't an official, properly filed this and that, whatever. It's that. But Zellner had sent a letter over to Judge Angie and was explaining that she was working with the state to arrange more scientific testing, and then lo and behold, within a day or two, poof, the decision comes. So, so anyway, it was only after the court fully considered the evidence submitted and issued in its final ruling. Really? Even though it took less time on that motion, which was something over 1,000 pages, it took less time on that than it took on any of the shorter ones that came after it, and it was fully considered. Okay, all right. That Avery finally alerted the court that he was working on further evidence to support his arguments, and no agreements on scheduling were submitted to the court for its approval until after the final decision was made to deny the defendant's original motion. The court determined that Avery cannot try to amend a motion that was filed without reservation after receiving an adverse decision from the court, basically. But my point here is that this motion was huge that was filed. Okay, nobody thought that decision was coming, but suddenly Zellner sends a letter over talking about the fact that she is arranging with the state to do further testing, and suddenly that decision comes with Godspeed. Boom, it suddenly materializes very quickly. Just saying. Okay, so this next clip here is about the CD, and the state's going to be talking about what the requirements are to meet Brady. in the state of Wisconsin and whatnot. So they're basically going to go through the three things required to meet the Brady standard, right? So here we go. It's my opinion, Steven, with the CD, makes all three of these easily. Anyway, so I'm going to show you guys this real quick so you can see it for yourself. Okay there, folks. So this is regarding the Veely CD. The state is basically arguing that, well, they're basically pointing out right now what the requirements are that you have to meet in order to meet Brady, right? It's funny because you see down here they say Avery's Brady claim must fail because he can meet no part of this test. Interesting. All right, well, let's go to number 1 here. The evidence at issue must be favorable to the accused, which it would have been because it would allow him to make Bobby Dassey a third-party suspect, which he could, speak of in front of the jury. So that would have been favorable, either because it is exculpatory or because it is impeaching. Okay. The evidence must have been suppressed by the state, meaning the defendant must not have had it in time to make effective use of the evidence, which is the case. It was handed over. It was in Fassbender's personal custody for 12 years and was handed over after Judge Sukowitz denied Avery's original motion for post-conviction relief. So I believe that seems pretty well met to me. The evidence must be material, meaning there is a reasonable probability that had the evidence been disclosed to the defense, the result of the proceeding would have been different. A reasonable probability is a probability sufficient to undermine confidence in the outcome. Well, I believe raising Bobby Dassey to the level of a Denny suspect would have been huge. Personally, in my opinion, that would have been a huge difference. So, in my eyes, I see that Avery meets all three of those with Detective Veely's CD. Now, we do know that the one thing the state argues in this is that, well, we did hand over the entire contents of the Dassey computer. Right. They handed over 7 DVDs that you had to use a special program called Encase to use to navigate and stuff. All these things that Detective Veely knew. This all brings me back to another problem I have with this, folks, is the fact that the state is allowed to spend to the moon to hire as many experts, all they want, to the moon and everything, and then they can hold back on something like this that they brought in Detective Veely to analyze this, and then they held back on those results. Okay, that CD that Detective Veely created was an easy to view PDF. Very simple. You don't need a special program for it. You pop it in. You understand? They held on. The Detective Veely CD was made in like April, right, of 2006. They ended up holding on to that, not turning it over. Then in December of 2006, they suddenly dumped 7 DVDs that required a special program to be able to review, and it was the entire contents. When somebody had already gone through it and forensically investigated it. This is why if the state spends money on an expert, then because most of the time the defendant doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the kind of resources the state has, right? In my opinion, if the state hires an expert to analyze something, that should be shared on both sides. That's my opinion here. I'd give a damn if they turned over the 7 DVDs, if they dumped a truckload of information on Dean and Jerry right before trial. What? No, I'm not impressed with that at all. So, alright. Okay, so this next bit is them attempting to offer an explanation for the bones and why it's not a violation of statute that they were given back, basically. So what I want to remind you is that, if you guys were watching Tracy earlier, what really needs to happen here is that the court system and the justice system needs to stop looking at wrongful convictions like some kind of taboo thing and treating them like some kind of taboo thing. The data coming out of the Innocence Projects is telling us that we're getting it wrong. And we're probably, and obviously the system is all, kind of invested in covering it for itself in a lot of ways. That's what we all need to be drawing attention to, calling attention to, creating a greater awareness of. And we do it through vehicles like Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. And the various Ryan Ferguson, Ricky Kidd, who was also on Tracy's channel today, over on the Scales of Injustice. Amanda Knox, there's so many, wrongfully convicted. Jason Strong, various, all these, various, wrongfully convicted people out there, and trying to create the awareness so that people in the public understand that this happens. And the system is kind of stuck on stupid, where it doesn't want to recognize that fact, that mistakes are being made. And we can point to those mistakes pretty clearly. And the system is being very lethargic in wanting to recognize that empirical data. So the next thing we're going to be moving into here is going to be, like I said, the bones and the state offering an explanation for why giving those bones back to the victim's family didn't violate statute, because in fact they're not the victim's bones. Why are you giving them back? Right? Anyway, so here we go. Okay, this is well, I'll put it this way. They avoided saying animal bones, but it's still, anyway, here we go. This is what they said. From those facts, the circuit court made the reasonable inference that there was no scientific evidence or record at the time that the material was released to support that human biological material was being released, or that the material was known to be the remains of the victim. Then why the hell would you be returning it to the family? It still begs the question. Why would you then be returning it to the Halbach family? If it's not the remains of the victim and it's not human, what are you doing? And now it's gone, and it can't be determined. So anyways, thought that was interesting. Okay, and this last clip, the final clip that I pulled out of here, is, I thought, a pretty disingenuous argument here, because the state is actually talking about how it's unreasonable to interpret the statute for preservation in such a way as Avery is asserting here, and blah 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 blah. And basically, to require law enforcement agencies to just store all this material indefinitely and this and that or whatever is unreasonable or whatever. And it basically, they're ignoring the fact that there is a procedure to be able to get rid of evidence in a proper fashion. It's what they're failing to point out here, what they're failing to realize here, is that they knew what they were doing was wrong, and that's why they were trying to hide it. And that's why they didn't go through that proper channel to do it properly. Because they didn't want Avery to say, well, I'd like to test those, or something like that. So they did what they did behind the scenes, under the table, and didn't hand over the ledgers, didn't hand over the investigation reports to any of Stephen Avery's attorneys, or make it part of, so that it could be made part of the record. Wasn't even sent to Stephen Avery, who obviously needs his complete record, to be able to review his case, back before he had Kathleen Zellner. But anyways, so why were things held back? So anyways, I'll show you this last little one here, and then we'll be back one more time. To read section 968.205 as requiring the preservation of all biological material whatsoever would read the conjunctive out of the statute, and would place an unreasonable, if not impossible, burden upon law enforcement. Law enforcement cannot be expected to identify preserved biological material that had no identifiable connection to the crime. None of the bone fragments recovered from locations in the quarry were positively identified as human. let alone the remains of Teresa Halbach. Section 968.205 does not mandate the preservation of suspected, unknown, or undetermined biological evidence. Therefore, the state was under no obligation to preserve those bone fragments. None of the bone, so they're basically trying to say, but it wasn't Teresa. But yet, who did they give these bones back to? That's what they keep saying here. They basically just keep saying that these bones aren't Teresa. But what also is interesting here is that they're saying law enforcement cannot be expected to indefinitely preserve biological material that had no blah, 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 whatever. It's like, no, actually, the statute says that they can get rid of it, or they can dispose of it, or that, in this case, give bones back to the Halbachs, as long as they let the person know who was convicted of the crime, as long as they send something to him or his attorneys and give them a chance to say something or have a say before it actually happens. But that didn't happen here. But that's a route that law enforcement can take when they need to, make room, or they're remodeling and they need to, get rid of evidence and that sort of. That's an avenue they can take, but it wasn't exercised here, and that's what the state's leaving out. So I just thought that was interesting. Alrighty, so that wraps up my highlights of part 2 of the motion. As I said, I'm going to try and do a more comprehensive, covering of this. I'm actually thinking, though, I might make it next Sunday, a week from Sunday. You guys might be very, very, very interested at what I'm planning to upload on Sunday midday, roughly about 2 or 3 o'clock Central. So I think you guys will be quite interested in that. So here we are. We're fighting the fight for Stephen and Brennan. And just remember, folks, I know you feel passionately for Stephen and Brennan, but remember there's something of a bigger picture here, because by helping Stephen and Brennan, or to help Stephen and Brennan further, it also helps to create the awareness of wrongful convictions and to help other people be aware that they happen in the way that you have become aware that they happen, right? Now, it's important not to bludgeon people over the head with it, but obviously as this stuff, as more and more people become interested and start to want to talk about this topic, it will gain awareness, and it will get more awareness through just common conversation between people, and hopefully the awareness will begin to spread to where people at least people won't have like this current thing. Like even Ricky Kidd, folks, said before he was convicted, even he said, like, I didn't think wrongful convictions happened. They weren't on my radar, he says. And that's, I think, the way a lot of people are. And that's what needs to change, or else the system's going to keep going on and talking like you saw the state talking in this thing. You know what I mean? Feeling like they can just get away with acting that way. Is it okay with you to see that? So I think when it comes to the bones, they have completely, there's no way to go on that. I find it very disingenuous that they're sitting there saying they're not Teresa's bones, so we didn't violate statute. They're not the victim's bones. There's nothing proving that they're the victim's bones. Then why are you giving them back to the victim's family? And why are some of Dr. Leslie Eisenberg's reports reporting that those are likely human, and then just before trial starts they suddenly become possibly human? Yeah, you gotta explain those things, right? And then suddenly here you are in 2011 after trial again, using one of Leslie Eisenberg's reports and picking bones out of those bags. Tells us what the state really thought, seeing as it was the guys who ran the state's case that were poking their nose into these bags and handing the bones back. Right? All right, as I said, folks, be looking out for Sunday. I'm sorry, I had originally planned to do a comprehensive coverage of the motion here, but I think what I'm going to do is give myself a week, because I got something going on Saturday, and then I gotta get that all ready to go for upload for you guys to be able to check out on Sunday. So I'm going to be pretty busy, so I don't know if I'll be able to do a comprehensive video on this, but I've picked out some of the best bits here. Hopefully this can tide everybody over until I can get around to it next weekend to do a bit more of a comprehensive look at the motion itself, or at the, response by the state here. So, alrighty folks, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.